Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of Book Time with Elvis. And today I thought I would give you a little shelf tour. I've been in the process of reorganizing. Well, that's a lie actually. They're not organized at all. I've been in the process of actually just putting books in the shelves, cleaning them off and stuff because I had my sister staying with me for a while, and we had lots of books and boxes and all that kind of stuff. So I wasn't able to get to them, and I was starting to collect just books piled up in other places. So all I've done is just remove some of the educational books I have and put them in a bookcase in another room, and try to keep all the books I read for pleasure here, though they're not organized in any kind of genre really or anything like that. So it will be a bit of an eclectic tour, I suppose, and I will start first with this shelf. If you're interested to see some of the books I've got, and I'll only do this one in this video because there's quite a few and it might take me a while. I'm sorry that I haven't got a better angle of the shelf. I've got it's not a very large room, and the way things are positioned, I can't really put the camera anywhere else, and I didn't want to, hold the phone and go through it and then try to open and show you the book. So let's begin. So the first one that you can see is this one here, Newbie, and this is by Simon Winder. I'm not actually sure how you'd say his name, Winder, and it's a kind of personal history with a bit of travel because he goes to different places. It's a personal history of the Danube region and the lands of the Habsburgs. So it's kind of a history of the Habsburgs from their beginning to the end. And it's the second book he's written that's to do with this kind of thing. The first one was Germania, where he looked at history of the German lands. And in this one, he's looking at the history of the lands surrounding the Danube. And as I say, the old Habsburg lands here. And it's a nice book. I really enjoyed it. I must have read it about 6 years ago, maybe more. But I think I would probably give it another read, actually, because now I've lived in this area for almost 9 years. I might appreciate some of that a bit more. So yeah, Newbie by Simon Winder. I guess it's up to you. So the next one we have on this shelf is by one of my favourite authors of history, and this is Giles, Milton. And this particular book is Footnotes, or Fascinating Footnotes rather, from history. Fascinating Footnotes from history. And it's just a collection of vignettes or anecdotes, all to do with different things from history, unusual things. So for example, on the inside cover here it says, "Did you know that Hitler took cocaine, that Stalin robbed a bank, that Charlie Chaplin's corpse was filched and held for ransom?" So there's all sorts of little things in here. For example, there is Hiro Onoda, the lone Japanese soldier still fighting the Second World War in 1974. Agatha Christie, who mysteriously disappeared for 11 days in 1926. Werner Franz, a cabin boy on the Hindenburg who lived to tell the tale when it was engulfed in flames in 1937. It also reveals who ate the last dodo, who really killed Rasputin, and why Sergeant Stubby had 4 legs. So there you go. I haven't read the whole thing cover to cover. It's one of those books I just like to dip into from time to time because each part really, or each little story stands alone, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, the next one some of you might recognize. It's a collection of definitions from Dr. Samuel Johnson's dictionary, and it featured heavily in the little series I did when I first started BookTube on Wordy Wednesdays, where I looked at the life of Samuel Johnson and some of his more interesting definitions. For example, things like fopdoodle, which is a fool or an insignificant wretch, nappiness, the quality of having a nap, and Smell Feast, who is a parasite or one who haunts good tables, for example. Those are just some of the examples. If you are interested, of course, please go back and watch the playlist Wordy Wednesday, and you can certainly find out some more of these funny and interesting phrases and definitions that Johnson uses. So this book is also in there. Another book that I've yet to read, but really want to, is The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs by Steve Broussat. And I've heard very good things about this and would really like to get reading, I suppose. But I've got so many other things at the moment. Something else that's been highly recommended, which I'm yet to read, is the Rivers of London series. This is the first book. I believe it's some kind of supernatural mystery series. And as I say, I've heard good things. If you recommend it, please let me know below. As I say, there's no particular method in the way these books are organised. So next there's one by Tobias Jones, The Dark Heart of Italy, which looks at endemic corruption all through Italian society and relationship between, for example, mafia and politics and sport and corruption in sport and that kind of stuff that all goes through Italy. So it's a very good book. Next one is by one of my favourite travel writers, Paul Theroux. He might be a grumpy sod at times, but he does do some interesting travels, and this is the Pillars of Hercules, which is his trip from Gibraltar around the Mediterranean all the way to Quetta in North Africa, and those two bits, because they kind of a narrow strait, if you like, where the Mediterranean Sea comes in from the Atlantic. They're called the Pillars of Hercules, and this is a really nice book. Not my favourite of his, but it's still a very good one if you like travel writing. Another book I've got is the excellent All Hell Let Loose by Max Hastings, and it is a very good one-volume history of the Second World War, told by those that experienced it. And if you haven't read Max Hastings and you like war and war history, I really recommend him. He's a fantastic British historian and journalist. Incidentally, he used to be Boris Johnson's boss at the Telegraph, I think, yes. And he thought he was absolutely useless. And then, of course, he goes on to become our Prime Minister. So perhaps he is a good judge of character, and certainly his books are really, really well written and well worth investigating if you have any interest in military history. Okay, the next one is one I've yet to read, which is by Michael Moran, and it's A Country in the Moon, and it is a kind of personal history of Poland. And, you know, I live only about 10 kilometers from Poland, and I've been there a few times, and I think it's a very interesting country with very nice people, and it is definitely a book I should get to soon. So there you go, A Country in the Moon. Okay, this book is a very interesting one, travel book that I read years ago. I mentioned it once already in another video, which is A Fortune Teller Told Me by Tiziano Terzani, and he is an Italian journalist who was once told by a fortune teller that he would die within the next year in a plane crash if he travelled by plane. So he spends, I can't remember if it was a year, maybe it was longer, but he spends the period of his travelling by not travelling by plane, and also looking at different kind of mystical things as well during his journalism and things. It's very interesting. Problem is, you know, when you read books, a lot of books, it's hard to remember every little thing in minute detail, and that's why I might have to do some rereads of these. I'm not, you know, I'm not a big rereader. I pretty much read only, or have reread only things like Three Men in a Boat and Treasure Island, which I go on and on about all the time. But since I've been on BookTube, everybody seems to be rereading stuff, and perhaps I should get into it, because definitely I would like to come back and explore some of these. Next one's another history one which is Surviving the Sword, Prisons of the Japanese from 1942 to 1945. And this is a book that examines what happened to British, Australian and American prisoners of war who were held by the Japanese in rather appalling conditions. As you can see from the cover, they all have, these men are all amputees, and it was probably due to poor care rather than injury sustained in war. It's a fantastic book, very moving, very sad at times, but also quite inspiring, the courage and fortitude of the people who endured the unendurable, really, because the Japanese viewed surrender as beneath contempt, so they treated many British, Australian and American soldiers who surrendered, perhaps even due to orders like many of those troops at Singapore, treated them horrendously. But this is a really nice and interesting book, which I heartily recommend. Okay, the next one is by another travel writer I quite enjoy, which is Colin Thuberon, and this book Behind the Wall, where he looks at what does he do? He goes on a journey from Beijing down to Burma or Myanmar, and as it says here, it's a 10,000 mile journey, and he goes all through the Gobi Desert and finishes at the far side or far end of the Great Wall. So he's very good. He's written really interesting books like The Lost Heart of Asia, where he travels through Central Asia. Among the Russians was a really interesting book when he goes traveling in the Soviet Union. Next book is also to do with China, and it's The Private Life of Chairman Mao, which I started. It was excellent, and for some reason I haven't finished, so I really must go back to it, restart it and finish it. And it is a biography, if you like, of Chairman Mao as seen from his private physician, and obviously you get to see a different side of him. So from what I remember, it was very interesting, but I think I only got something about like that far in, so I really should go back to finish that. I don't know why sometimes I must get distracted. It's not a conscious choice, because as I say, there was absolutely nothing wrong with it, otherwise I wouldn't have kept it. So I really should just carry on and go back to that. The next one is another kind of biography, and it's the biography of Baron Ungern Sternberg, who is known or was known as the Bloody White Baron, and he was a Baltic aristocrat from Estonia, I think. I can't remember where exactly, but ironically I ended up visiting one of his family's estates when I was on holiday in the Baltics several years ago, and I recognized the name, and I thought, I have a book about that guy, which I haven't read yet, so I think that would be very good. I'll give you a bit off the back if you like. Born Baron Ungern Sternberg, Baron Ungern Sternberg was a Baltic aristocrat, a violent, headstrong youth posted to the wilds of Siberia and Mongolia before the First World War. After the Bolshevik Revolution, the Baron, now in command of a lethally effective rabble of cavalrymen, conquered Mongolia, the last time in history a country was seized by an army mounted on horses. Driven by a cocktail of esoteric beliefs, anti-Semitism and violent obsessions, he invented ever more cruel ways of slaughter and torture. James Palmer's book is a fascinating recreation of this barely believable man who foreshadowed the Nazis in his terrible combination of mysticism and genocide. I'm sure most people want to read it after hearing that, don't you? Amazing. The next two are by the same author, David Goulson, who is a writer on natural history and natural things, and there's a fantastic book, A Sting in a Tail, which is a memoir of him growing up and his relationship with bees and story of bees, and it's fantastic. And one I haven't read yet, which is the story of David when he buys buys a derelict farm in France, and he has 33 acres of land, and he sets about looking at what lives there. So that will be really interesting read, I think. The next one is by Ryszard Kapuscinski, who I've mentioned in my last video, actually, because he wrote the book Travels with Herodotus, and this is his travels through the Soviet Empire, the Soviet Union, and it's it's an interesting travel log forward there by Margaret Atwood. Again, I'm trying to remember it all because it's several years since I read it, but yes, it's a interesting work of his relationship and travels within the Soviet Empire. Yeah. Okay, the next one is one called The Towel of Poo, which is looking at the work, the Taoism or Tao, the way as seen through the eyes or stories of Winnie the Pooh, and it's a nice little pick-me-up book, of life and philosophy and that kind of stuff, as seen from the perspective of Winnie the Pooh. I read this many years ago. This copy I haven't read. I bought it because I'd read somebody else's. I read it back when I was in Japan, and I think there's the Tale of Piglet as well, which unfortunately I haven't got with me. Next one, penultimate one rather, is Neil Gaiman's Stardust, which is a fantastic fairy tale for adults, I think. It was made into quite a funny film, though I think, as a lot of people, I would prefer the book. It's probably been talked about a lot. Neil Gaiman's a very popular author, so I will just say that it's pretty much a fairy tale for adults, which is what I just said. It's got some kind of witchcraft in it, and some different creatures and flying ships and that kind of stuff, and pirates of the sky and all sorts. So it was good fun, and I recommend it if you want something short and fun to read. And the last one goes back a long time ago to my school days, and I have a terrible feeling actually I'd borrowed this from someone and never returned it, so maybe if they see the video they'll be asking for it back. You can see it's in poor condition. It's Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, but in modern English, or English that we would find easy to understand, because I studied Chaucer when I was doing my A-levels, like many people who did English, I suppose, back in those days. It's fun now for me to look back in the original English, but in those days it was nice to have this as a companion to kind of understand the stories a bit better, because we had to read them in the Middle English, which was tricky, but at least from something like this we could get something out of it. So there we go. That's a short tour, well, not that short, I suppose, at almost 20 minutes, tour of one of my bookshelves. I hope you found it enjoyable, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon in another video about which could be about anything. Sorry, I'm just kind of rabbiting on there. Okay, everybody, enjoy your weekend. Take care. Bye-bye. Ba-da-da